University in Bogota. So let me remind you that there is simultaneous interpretation into English and Portuguese because they are following us from Africa, Europe, Asia, organizations, donors, communities that continue. They serve community action. So we promote voices, participation, and leadership of local stakeholders in each stage of the humanitarian cycle, from design to evaluation or assessment. Community participation is more than a principle of community action. It's a need to build solutions, sustainable solutions, pertinent solutions, and transforming solutions. Therefore, this space has been designed. The title is Towards Effective Participation. So we're going to discuss development solutions hand in hand with communities so that we can have a transforming approach and we can have the effective participation, real participation. So we will have Vyatriz, Quiguanas' experience, Naileth, Useche's experience. They will share challenges, proposals that come up from transformation. An urgent call to rethink our practices and go for processes where communities are the protagonists from beginning to end. Each panel with orienting questions so that we rethink, we go beyond. The first one, how to achieve for communities to participate actively in decision making in projects, and we saw it in the first panel. Decision makers, what role do international stakeholders play to facilitate this participation without affecting or impacting local dynamics? The last one, what common obstacles are faced in community projects, those effective ones, and how we could overcome them. So let me invite our two presenters so that they are here on the stage. Very shy. Everything that you need to say this morning, and we also have a big stakeholder to moderate this panel. I invite Andrés, Felipe, Martínez from the UNHCR. So you need to take notes, and we'll go open questions for the public. Andrés, can you sit here? The logistics is you can help us with microphones, and you are here, UNHCR. 1 hour, sort of. You have time. Time goes against sometimes towards community participation, effective community participation. Welcome, everyone. Well, thank you. Let me greet the organizers, Salto Ángel, and then the German cooperation, others that I'm not mentioning. Javeriana University, no doubt, my alma mater. So we are here to reflect on a milestone in localization. This is what you know, or some of you know, that is transformation. This milestone is part of this dimension of participation. Participation of communities in humanitarian action. So we're gonna delve into these principles, and there is no doubt there is commitment from humanitarian organizations so that they take on the manifesto for the transformation so that we guarantee rights to participation by people and by communities in humanitarian programming. So in this space, we already have our colleague, and Vyatriz is here. Vyatriz Quiguana. Vyatriz leads the process, the CRIC process, the youth people's process in the north of Cauca department, with two very interesting processes: identifying harmonies, and they promote strategies with the youth in the region, brotherhood strategies. We're going to look at those strategies in detail. Naileth, the other panelist, she takes us to the border with Venezuela. Neighborhoods in Cúcuta. She works at the CORPMUVE Foundation, and she works hand in hand with gender-based violence victims, people who have just come from Venezuela, other migrants, other refugees as well, and they relate directly with them. She is a leader there in Cúcuta city. I don't want to speak long. We just have 1 hour or a little more. But why the importance of Manifesto? We find that what the Manifesto did in these past 2 years, let me tell you that Transformation Manifesto is part of the flagship initiative. You have heard of it. And the Manifesto, what it does is that it frames a better comprehension of what significant participation is in humanitarian action in general. So this means participation that modifies, and it modifies humanitarian programming from communities' priorities. That's where the speech changes. Humanitarian practice changes. Identity changes a little bit. And the humanitarian purpose changes when the Manifesto brings communities' priorities to the logics of humanitarian programming. Now, I'll stop. From my roles perspective, from the UNHCR, what the result has been, what the Manifesto result has been, is the call for accountability and transparency. They mentioned this in the previous panel. The call to transparency about what? Some of them call them involvement, but we call it guaranteeing community participation. To say it in other words, is a look to ourselves as international stakeholders. This is to set the context. I repeat, Manifesto for Transformation, and my colleagues will speak more about it. Let's start with the next question. Naileth and Vyatriz, why do you think that community participation plays a very important role, has played it in the recent years, and why the need for a Manifesto for Transformation in Colombia? Those are the two questions. Good morning. Naileth Useche, my name. I am a community leader. Let me give you the context. When many leaders meet from the whole territory and they called us, international cooperation was there for us as the community, as the people who are there in the neighborhood, and they get to know the problems. That was success. Because having them all and saying what we needed to be done so that it worked, it was excellent. And that's where the manifesto's born. And that was the leaders meeting saying what we should do so that everything works and to progress as the community, as the territory. The importance our manifesto has is that it collects all the gaps inside communities, territories, neighborhoods, organizations. It collects the gaps. We've discovered throughout time that being organized and together is the best way of walking, because you cannot do anything by yourself or on your own. This was so interesting, and it was so effective for us as an organization. And from there, the motto, at least in the migration area, the one I work with, decisions are to be made between cooperation, grassroots organization, international organization, plus migrants. Migrants should be part of the decisions. Later, I can give you a summary. What is the manifesto and what did it mean for us back then? And each point, it'd be great if everyone took it and they kept it in mind. What happens with Manifesto nowadays? A few years after it started, it has changed. The situation has changed. I mean, about international cooperation has changed. I disperse, I get, I go all around, but about the question, community work, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, no. I was there in the other panel, and I really liked a word that I heard in the other panel. It's not volunteer work, it's humanitarian work. It's interesting for organizations to see us, leaders, as humanitarian people. We can go hand in hand together, and that's the way we can work together. Sorry, because I mentioned other things. She's speaking Indigenous language. Good morning, everyone. I want to greet each one of you. Greetings. I'd like to introduce myself. Andrés introduced me. I'm Vyatriz Quiguanas. I'm a politologist. I studied at Valle University. I'm leading the youth spaces with the CRIC youth program, the Cauca Regional Council, CRIC, C-R-I-C. I'd like to thank you all for the invitation. As the panelists said, we were here 2 years ago in this space. We got together, we met, we spoke, and we made proposals. In those proposals, we said, we communities have needs. How are we going to provide for those needs? How can we hear from the community? One way or another, in some spaces, what happened is that an organization comes, but then they already have everything structured. And many times the community, they say, no, we need this. And what you bring, but that doesn't help us to strengthen. So how is this built from the community? Because those of us who are in the territory, those of us who are in neighborhoods, those of us who are in cities, we are the ones who know the territories. We are the ones who know our needs. And that's how this is built together. This is how we speak, how we help one another. So we start the manifesto in the transformation and how to listen to grassroots organizations, how to listen to the communities who are there in the territory. So, the introduction as to how the manifesto was born, it was not only us. There were so many peoples here, many peoples from the neighborhoods who were leading that space, and it was built together.
The questions we were asked before as to how community participation has gained importance, we talked about this, and I'm saying this in this case as on behalf of my NASA community in Cauca. We're all different peoples. We have 11 peoples there, 10 associations that have been built, and it's been a long trajectory of several years. We always focus on two things. Before participation, we are at a space of invasion, colonization, all of that, and all that sense that we didn't have any community participation where we didn't have a voice or a vote. But then how after the organizations began to work, in this case the regional indigenous council, we began to exercise community participation, something I said before, together with other colleagues and other people. Maybe at the moment there were 10 young people, but today it's many more. There are many more. It's been 53 years when the Regional Indigenous Council of Cauca CRIC started, but before that we had started working there. But have we actually transcend? How will we transcend? And we see the importance to listen to boys, girls, to listen to young boys and girls, to listen to women, right? Because somehow it's important to listen to what they're thinking, what they're actually feeling in that area. If we talk about Cauca, well, many of us think it's a territory where the armed conflict is still very strong. However, in spite of the fact that the armed conflict is in our territories, but how have we counteracted the armed conflict against it? We've used some strategies, and I told you actually how we took those young men we from war, how we removed them from the armed conflict. And one of the strategies that we always use in our territories is the art skills. When we paint murals, when we do dancing, when we do music, boys and girls get there, children get there. So these are key strategies that we've been using, and it's thanks to those strategies that we've progressed in political participation. Today, women are organized, the peoples are organized, and our guard is organized. So the young people's process has been going on for 45 years. And we've been coming along. We've held political assemblies, we've held art gatherings, not just with the with low population. I mean, but we have had people like 2,000, 3,000 to 5,000, including children, adolescents, and also the whole community. Actually, we are a step away from conducting the fourth Congress of the Association of the Changualaquigua. It's part of the one of the areas, part of the Indigenous Regional Center, and we actually expect over 15,000 participants. But we're about to take a step in Indigenous Regional Congress the first week in July, and we hope to get over 25, 20, maybe 25,000 people who may participate as a community, who are entitled to have a conversation, participate in dialogue in a political analytical space, and how we will actually suggest that what we actually dream from now to 20 years will be realized. So these are the events where we've worked. And of course, participation of an indigenous community is very different from participation in a city. I could not speak about that to say, yeah, in the cities we can also do that because it's a very different context. Maybe the armed conflict is not in the cities, but we have other conflicts, other violences that also impact our organizations. So that's how we have worked in that direction, but after the manifesto, we have strengthened community participation. Why? Because we in Cauca work in an articulated manner. These are base processes, the women and the guard. We work in an articulated manner. What am I getting at? When there are processes with the young and they participate in the assemblies, well, women and the youth are there. So all together we listen to one another, and the traditional authorities, what they do is they guide and they support. But the decisions are made by the assembly because that's the foundation, the body that makes the decisions, and I mean political decisions. So I wanted to tell you about that, the experience we have lived, how we work in Cauca, how we've made community participation stronger, what the trends are that we've seen, what to take into account, and there are many more strategies. We have political training, political advocacy, art training, but we also have psychosocial training because either for good or for bad, the armed conflict has impacted us severely, and we have been able to move some young people away from the war. But how do we make this sustainable? So, in this process, as guards and women, our homes, we have the shelters, and since we recruit youth for ourselves and away from war, give them security, but we also give them psychosocial training and emotional training at a personal, family, and community level. Okay, we're going to talk about Naileth Vyatriz point. At a glance, you can see three of the recommendations that they've expressed in the manifest in favor of transformation. First one, Naileth, is to recognize us as humanitarian stakeholders with knowledge, right? Experience, dynamics, and so on in the territory where we are, right? Where we operate, if you can call it so, in the logic of the classical humanitarianism where we operate, recognizes as humanitarian stakeholders, but also they bring, Vyatriz, she brings this expression that sometimes organizations bring it all packed and to their comfort. That has been a constant reflection. So how do we move from bringing everything all together, packaged from the city, to work with the communities there, out there in the field? So some colleagues who have realized this, they've developed methodologies, right? The War Child, they work with the community, with the UNHCR, with the two communities, and they realized this and they brought their own methodologies to fit the needs of the communities. I make it match with the offer and the humanitarian portfolio of the international NGOs. So we find this recommendation in the manifesto, this recommendation of transformation, everything about this, saying listen to us and listening, active listening as an exercise. We always listen, right? But we bring it up as an activity of active listening and so on. But in our classical humanitarianism, this transcends the assessment of individual needs and it begins to look at the needs of the whole territory, of a whole population, and so on. So I kind of wanted to encourage you to look for this manifest, look it up in the internet, and correlate it to what we have heard here from Vyatriz and Naileth. The next question, colleagues, the this is just one tool amongst so many. We talked about community participation. it's an instrument that intends to pull commitments from different stakeholders, like we said at first. Okay. The question is how to increase the commitment of the participation of all stakeholders in the work with the communities. So we're talking about commitment to reach agreement. So how can we increase that level of participation? So you have the floor. When you talk about commitment, I like that word because it's the core responsibility between community and organizations. My colleague said, and as a matter of fact, sometimes the decisions made by international organizations when they go to a neighborhood or they go to a community, they're already made. It's been structured. What they say is, okay, get 25 people, these age range, it's all structured. And they offer things that, well, kind of doesn't cover us. That's what we've done. The commitment of the declaration or the manifesto and the cooperation should be let's listen. It's one of the foundations to listen to the communities, listen to the leaders, those of us that go on foot. We listen to people, what people say, and we know what our needs are. Actually, at least in Cucuta, where I come from, and can I talk to you about that place? We have built a network of leaders because let's say the gap between let's say organizations, the local, regional, international level, it's a huge gap. And today, amongst all of us, I can talk to you about a network of leaders that is really important. That's got a lot of migrant vulnerable population. So we have worked our field of work because not only do we serve migrants, we see people in the welcoming communities that are the host communities that are vulnerable as much as ours as the migrant community. So we don't only work for ourselves. So this gap we see now has made us unite to look for common solutions to reinvent ourselves. So I believe that today's commitment, and speaking of today, after the issue of budget costs, things that we've seen everywhere, we've perceived it everywhere. That's what it is. We need to reinvent ourselves. We need to talk about employment and entrepreneurship. That's just on the way out, come and go. But that's another point of the manifesto. We need to get trained. We need to have installed capacities, and then help us, right? I guess that's kind of a safeguard. And then we need to move on from there because it's happened. Thanks to UNHCR, I got trained and they trained me. I learned everything I learned, and I was there starting from zero in Venezuela. I didn't work in anything related to this. I was just a housewife. But when I got here with my migration issues, also problem with I've been pulling a problem with I'm a survivor of gender violence, and so nowadays, thanks to UNHCR and many more organizations that empowered us, I can help women in that area with gender-based violence, soft skills, for psychological aid. So the installed capacity is there. We got it. Now we need to reinvent ourselves to continue because we've got the capacity and we have the means to do it. Well, not the means, but the knowledge to do it. Now about cooperation, yeah, that's that. To listen and to listen well. Not like our colleague said, not just to bring papers that are already written on a desk from an office. The, the field is working. There are a lot of people in need. Now we've got a new migration wave, right? We've got the displacement that they've come to the neighborhoods. The at least in Cucuta, a lot of new families with displaced individuals because of the armed conflict. Very, very much focused. But the idea is not just assistentialism. They said, you don't need to give me, just help me, teach me. And people got used to this. And it's an approach we're trying to change because it's just to give assistance. And I give you, no, but teach you how to find. So, entrepreneurs, work with entrepreneurs, check how we are doing about the entrepreneurial efforts, how it's been done, and take into account that people will continue on their own. They may continue. We just need to train people. It's just to let go, and that's what's being restructured. We definitely had to do it the hard way with this abandonment. I told my colleague Andrés, an institutional abandonment. They abandoned us all. And even, I don't know, I'm sorry to say this, but that's how I am. Why did you invite me in the first place? I must say what I think. Even at a personal level, I had a relation, I have a close relation to people with the UNHCR based on my training. But this silence and this uh, void or this, let's say, hole after the international support, after it came to an end, not even a call, to say, to tell us what's happening and ask me what you're doing. Nothing. What are you doing with your community, with the people that needed assistance? But nothing. There's nothing. I mean, mm, I'm sorry to say, but a lot of communities uses, but we're learning. That's how we're learning, the hard way. The hard way. Turning this into an opportunity. Okay? So I just want to tell you that if you're in this planet, it'd be interesting if your leaders were informed because there are a lot of people who are leaders who know, not as an organization, but they don't have the coverage maybe, but as friends, that warm tone, that humanitarian feeling that we leaders sometimes we need to feel that because it's good if people tell you, okay, yeah, a pat in the back, you're doing it well. Without resources, with money, but you're doing it well. And they can see our work. And okay, I'm sorry. I always start to talk about some other things, unrelated things. Okay. One of the things that I'd like to highlight here, and maybe I apologize to do it here, but somehow it's kind of like if we started to talk from our side. And when we talk about increasing the commitment of humanitarian actors, I think the big task ahead of us, and for each one of us as our heart, and I said this before 2 years ago actually, that the indigenous communities we've been stigmatized, discriminated against our African Colombian colleagues and so on, because here in Colombia there are a lot of indigenous peoples, but unfortunately sometimes they see us indigenous peoples and they see us people with our costumes and they continue to see us as a minority, right? In these contexts and these events. So I guess one of the commitments is how to give more opportunities to all peoples. It's not just the Nasa people. We also have the different peoples, the Wa people, the Guajira people. I mean, they need that support. So how can they strengthen their groups and to enjoy or have access to humanitarian assistance? Because somehow families need that too. Children need it. And basically, today, most of the time in these spaces we talk about rights, most of we see young adolescents and especially young men and women and children. And if we talk about commitments, it's from both sides. So how can I chip in from my side and how organizations, the state, and so on, how they will contribute, right? Sometimes we say, okay, the armed conflict is in our territories, but it's not just the armed conflict of war, that it's not our war. However, we have had to live it. And most of us who have been victims of war, it's us, civilians. And most of them are young people, maybe in an indigenous community, in a territory. There may be 15,000 inhabitants. Of the 15,000, 80% of them are young. They're adolescents. They're children today. But how can they guarantee their space as state? The humanitarian organizations, how can they guarantee their safety? Because forced recruitment amidst indigenous people is big. They don't care if it's a boy, if he's 13, 14 years old, even as of 10 years old, they're recruited by force. So notice how far this has gotten. So one thing of the commitment is how can we actually reach those young people, not just to listen, because listening, okay, anyone can listen, anyone can do it, but how do we actually put things into practice? How do we help or support this young man or this young lady? How we support the community? How we support the young people in the neighborhood who are amidst the gangs? They are recruited by the gangs.
There is drug addiction. We don't see that in Cauca. We do have high consumption of psychoactive substances. We didn't used to see that before. That has expanded in all territories, in cities. And how can we go against this? The commitment is on both sides. Probably in communities, we have a lot of strategies from community leaders, we have a lot of strategies, but if from organizations or the state we do not have that support, that help, it's very difficult to counteract. So, with the little things we have, we continue working. We have strengthened this space. I told you that in Cauca we have so many processes that we have strengthened. But how have we received those threats? Violation is against female leaders, social leaders in general, the youth. We can do a lot, but sometimes threats bring fear. One is a woman, one is a mother, and one thinks about their children, our children in the armed conflict war, when since they could not go against us or two parents, fathers, then they go for the weakest. What's the weakest? Our children. So I know that many women, men who are present here, many of us have felt that pain because we've lost our family members in the armed conflict and the war. The idea is that we raise with the strength to actually contribute and to help youth, help other communities. So, from the commitments, what are the most efficient ones in this space? Let's work from families. Let's work from children because that's where the basis is. That's where the basis is. When we're adults, well, we have some knowledge, but we need to strengthen that knowledge and that experience. They need to have awareness in that little seed that's there. In our language, we say from atul. Atul is family. In our language, we say gathering. Father, mother, children, grandparents. So we need to start counteracting from there. I'd like to say something. I was listening to Vyatriz and I say, let me tell you, well, to the people who are here, one way we can get to communities and from my leadership, self care. I always said it, I've always mentioned it. Organizations empower us and they tell us, well, this, and but they don't tell us how to take care of ourselves. So I speak about nowadays. I mean, 2 years ago, probably we didn't see so much violence, but now it's different. I just suggested self-care to work so that leaders, people who are being trained, they're told, be careful, don't do this. Because sometimes you're in the midst of problems because it's lack of knowledge. So we could work with those where in the communities as well. So that they can take care. Soft, soft skills as well. They're gonna be welcome. And this is a way of changing attitudes. Because if it's because of peace, we're looking at peace and it's difficult. Because since if at home we do not promote values and we teach how to drain anger, well, on the street we're gonna have people who are reactive. This could bring conflicts. Well, you know more about that, so I'll leave it here. I'd like to tell you that we need to be careful that many of the communities, we are tired of so many things that the impact is there, that impact can be counteracted. There's lack of harmony in each one of the spaces in this sense. Let me tell you about the experience. We, with the youth, every 2 years, we conduct a gathering. There is political positioning. We analyze. We value the territorial context. How are we doing as the youth, as young girls? What is our objective? What if there is lack of harmony? What the strategies are? Those that the way we can counteract. It's important to highlight that indigenous communities do have patriarchy. That comes from history. We've been able to act in that sense as well. I spoke with someone just a little ago, and it's sad. In some of the indigenous peoples, women cannot participate in communities. There cannot be female leaders. There aren't, because there are men always leading. So how can we help those people so that they can so that women can come out of their homes, they can come out of their territories, they can knock on doors so that they can contribute to communities. These are situations or experiences that we live, and we said, yes, it's present. Not 100%, but one way or another, we've had the opportunity for women to lead so that they're authority. We even have women who are mayors. They are part of government. So I think that we've gained through our fights as indigenous communities and as regional councils and the Cauca Regional Council. I also like to tell you about the way we help build peace. In Cauca, there is something very beautiful that happened. Every 2 years, we have the cultural gatherings, artist gatherings. Last year, we had this process as the youth. There is the Bachoque movement. Last year, in the north part of Cauca, we received over 35 artist groups. Those groups were comprised of boys, girls, parents, over 2,500 people in that space. They can strengthen their artistic abilities or skills. Like I told you, counteracting is not easy. Why? Because one is a victim of threats. We give the opportunity of those boys and girls, and when a boy or a girl, you take them to those spaces for artist presentations, they all want to be there. They all want to be presenters. So that's how those processes become visible. So I wanted to tell you that the artistic strategy in Cauca has been mainly to counteract war and armed groups. Realities in communities are told by Naileth and with all the other recommendations in the manifesto. Vyatriz and Naileth tell us about this. They told us that there is this call to reinvent ourselves. This is a comment, but it's the same call to reinvent ourselves by the humanitarian reset. This is what it is. In the logics of transformation of the humanitarian system, the global system, this is a call from our desks to think, to be thinking outside the box. What humanitarian action has been like in the past years? Naileth told us that there is an installed capacity. However, humanitarian presence is not sustained. It does not connect with the nexus. It does not connect with peace, consolidation, and development. So there is this call. Manifest for transformation calls for action sustainability. This is part of the document. Then Vyatriz tells us it's part and part. What does it mean to be part and part? Well, in Manifest Recommendation 7 or 8, it calls us to accountability. To be accountable, to delve not onto sophisticated mechanisms of accountability in a box where beneficiaries of humanitarian actions can fill out their claim with part of the procedure, the humanitarian procedure, not like that, but accountability based on what the priorities are for communities. A dialogue that brings sustainability throughout time. In accountability, they can extend humanitarian action or connect it with key stakeholders. Nowadays, there is uncertainty, and we have key stakeholders, let's say regional, local authorities. We also have private stakeholders who play a key role when developing their territories. The panelists also mentioned trainings. Naileth, after the manifest, the flagship community group reflected on the methodologies that have been implemented. All of us, all of you, in each one of your organizations, Naileth, and we did find that there is a recommendation. The recommendation is that it's not too much or too little, and that means capacity exchange. We've gone there with training, but there has to be also exchange. Your knowledge, your experience will also be well received from humanitarian professionals. We know that this is important, but we still can channel this in a better way in the communitarian context, these types of trainings. All right, let's go to the next, and let me invite you. If you have questions, let's take advantage of time to try to answer questions from the audience. Manifesto for transformation is to share knowledge, to understand communities as peers. So then the question is, what recommendations can you all share for the near future so that community participation is a reality in humanitarian action? Naileth, some of the recommendations from the manifesto, that you brought them. So if there is another recommendation in these 2 years, if you can share them with us. Thanks. Okay, recommendations. Recommendations, okay, in the near future, it sounds pretty, and it should be like that. But I took note of something that I want to tell you. Guarantee real conditions to participate. There cannot be participation if people have to choose between going to work or going to a meeting. We need to recognize time and community knowledge and retribute it in a dignifying way. Sometimes it happens to us. Well, you know, I gotta go to that meeting, but I also have to go to work. This is part of the manifesto. And the manifesto says, leaders should be recognized. I mean, they should be given some type of financing, because without leaders, there are no organizations. And if there are no organizations, cooperation cannot get to neighborhoods. There have to be leaders. So we need to be recognized financially. I mean, so that we don't have to make that decision. It happened, you know, I postponed several meetings because of because of my labor activities or my work-related activities. Decisions are not to be made before consultation. Participation cannot be just a formal requirement. Communities need to have real advocacy from formulation to policy making, and those projects that are taken to communities, to neighborhoods or territories. Invest in processes. There are organizations, and my colleague said it, and we all know about this. They go contact you, they take a picture. That's instrumentalization that we've always been part of. They take a picture of you, and that's the picture. That's the picture that actually brings value. The training is good, but it's not just going there for 1 hour and never come back. So participation must be inclusive. Participation, sorry, is not built in a workshop, but it is built when there is continuous accompaniment, when there is training, when there is trust. It is built throughout time. We said in the manifesto, presence, permanence, revising things that have happened. And not everything is bad. Not everything has been bad. We have had good experiences, good practices. And it'd be great for communities, amongst organizations, for us to be able to say what has happened, how have we advanced this time. Well, that could be another recommendation to strengthen autonomous. But without organization, there is no sustainability. We need to support leadership without being the owners of their processes. I always go for emerging leadership to convey knowledge, and it is done from the grassroots organizations. Support from organizations is easier, of course. The manifest is to be turned into a tool that is alive. It is to be used as a guideline. It is to be adapted to the reality and to implement it with commitment. And I insist, just let's make it ours. And we know it. And we make it ours. Please read it. There is this summary, if you want it. One of the proposals that I wanted to share with you, the recommendation that I could give is how to advance in these processes. Talking about community participation and that this is actually a reality. Just as we have mentioned, as a youth organization, we work on brotherhood, sisterhood. Brotherhood and sisterhood, what does it mean in our context? Experience exchange. Álvaro Cochocoy youth movement within the last 45 years, and the same thing of the Indigenous Guard in the north part of Cauca, those have had those processes so that other areas are strengthened as well, so that processes are there in all the other regions of the council.
So what do I mean by this? The 10 associations that form and the 11 people that form CRIC in all those areas, we have youth processes, women's processes, and we have the guard processes. So that's how we began to weave networks and exchange experiences. The Alvaro Puey youth movement has been recognized because they always dreamed of having a program of youth, CRIC youth at the regional level. And 20 years ago, we started this process as the CRIC youth and the youth movement has been there for 45 years. So we belong to the same process, one single home, one single organization. So I expressed these exchange of experiences, how we exchange experiences with other people. I also told you about the experience that we have lived about knowledge exchange experience with the first line, the social outburst in Cali. We have had a relation with them too because somehow the process of young people out there in the field, we've lost young youth leaders along the process, but they lost young people too when the social rioting took place. So how are we going to help one another and support one another? We've also worked on the interethnic table at the moment, the indigenous person with the peasant and the African Colombian. There was a conflict that we heard about everywhere, but later, after the peace accord signing, we've tried to work together with them. Of course, not always do we agree at 100% because it's not all, you know, uh, wonderful. Not everything can be worked out overnight to solve problems and flaws we have as a people, but somehow we've been able to work together in this space and how can we influence them in our organization because somehow in Cauca and Valle del Cauca Most of us are indigenous population, but we should not ignore that there are peasants too. There are peasant communities, African Colombians too. And sometimes we laugh at it, but the indigenous person has married an African Colombian. So we actually form family ties, and it's not nice that we fight another when we live and inhabit the same territory. So we've talked to them. We have had brotherhood relations with the Afro-Colombian people, and we go there to feel. We say, okay, that's nice when we understand the process, but sometimes people say, no, I don't like that, I don't like this, and we begin to create these weaknesses, and that's part of our processes. Um, Also, we had discussed this in the manifesto that there were some big recommendations, and not to close our minds. Sometimes the organizations they apply to processes, but they have an age range limit or the number of participants, and we apply this to a community or a neighborhood. It will only say only for 60 people. But what if a territory, most of them are young? Well, unfortunately, there isn't much to be done. So what have we done? We have had organizations years back, and they said, no, just we can only serve adolescents between 15 and 17 years of age, or 7 or 25, and in a territory there are over 20, no, 4 to 5,000 young people. So how do we work? How do we find an uh, initiative? Yes, there are some foundations that may support us. It's okay, we receive it, but how we begin to strengthen them and how can we include them in an open manner because somehow in our communities they're children that are very analytical. Times change and today boys or girls they're analyzing. They analyze the territory and the context because education changes too. Formal and informal education they've changed too in these contexts. So how do we start to work on those processes? One more thing that we discussed is that the resources that are allocated will get to the communities. Why? Many times there are intermediaries, there's a middleman, and most of the resources they're just left up in, you know, stuff. If we're going to structure, build human capacity, it should be the same people, the same leaders in the territories. They can actually develop their human talent. Take into account that they are out there in the field. They know it. They know their community, they know their people, and we can actually work together. I said this before. These projects should be presented by the community, by the neighborhoods. They know their needs. They know. They know how they feel. So I kind of wanted to highlight that the commitments and the recommendations that we should take into account. We should start there in the territory from the communities. There are two questions, one over here, one over there. Thank you. Good morning to everyone. I'm Carolina Ponsa from the PCN Black Community Process. I got a question because you called my attention something that you said about dignity in the framework of leadership. And I'd like to ask, it's actually it's a question, but you may analyze the topic, but it's a question for everyone who's present, and it's how is, let's say, worth retribution that women don't get to, and how this is impacted by women who are mothers or leaders or workers. How are they impacted? And we see this in different contexts, and it turns out there's not rightful payment or in the incompensation process. So that's it. And number two, uh, there are many challenges in humanitarian assistance, and I believe that it may be also a challenge in the framework of us as local organizations. and it's how to approach the instrumentalization of some leaders or the instrumentalization of organizations, small organizations, through leadership. And I'm bringing this up to the same topic of dignity, so that we reflect our local organizations in the framework of this instrumentalization. It's something that's been done by the international bodies, the NGOs, and so on. We are also replicating some of those actions that we see, and this is impacting people in the territories. That's it. Thank you. Thanks for your comments. Out of these conversations from Naileth, I can say that most likely when the project was designed in the logical framework, they had not foreseen the transformational change that you're talking about as a result of the work that UNHCR did in your community. And it's a thing that we're missing out on the most important thing because we didn't put in the logical framework, or it was probably so ambitious that we'd better not put it. I don't know. I'm impacted because, yeah, it's okay. We see that happens, but we don't know what to do with it. We don't know what to do with those change processes that you can observe them perfectly well. It's changes in the family, changes in the relation amongst the members of the organization with the authorities and so on. There are a whole bunch of changes that are absolutely orphan, right? They're not recorded, they're not documented, and it's not recorded actually. I also believe that we do not take enough a good look at how humanitarian workers, they don't deliver a message with an arrow in one single direction, but they live their own processes and they're not recorded, and it's not intentional. But in practice, most likely, the communities earn a lot, but the workers who participate in interaction, they earn too. If we do this, if we make it more explicit, maybe the self-care arises as a need for the two parties, because the situation, the difficult situation that people live when they do work in the field, that's not actually normal. I know several cases of people who, after they complete a project, they need to go back to sleep and rest for 6 months because they are, extenuated, they are exhausted, or they're destroyed. I mean, these are topics that we need to look into and we need to include in the logical framework. Okay, I have a question after we heard the question before. This proposal to pay the leaders, it scares me because you know, this creates commitments and some acquired rights. We, in a country, Venezuela, we have some work laws and they're complicated, but some volunteers who worked for a government agency, they prosecuted because they wanted to prove that there was a labor relationship with the organization they served as volunteers. So the organization had to pay them to compensate. So just to bring that up, I think we need to find a workaround. It should be that the community can collect money and they pay. I don't know. There's just ideas that came up to me after listening to you about the situation, how to come out, how to end a relation in the with the community. Well, there have been some strategies, the end or closure strategies, but given the sudden suspension of resources, the organization probably was not able to do it. So I think there is a call. This is a call because the guidelines are not ours, but they're imposed, so we become rigid. No one says that you cannot call the community, right? You're right. But there are some protocols that they tell us. They recommend it to have a personal relationship because, well, it's confusing. So there are things to be debated there. And I don't think that's a minor thing. And the last thing that I wanted to say is that less and less money is coming. So the goal is not just 40, but I don't know. We're gonna have the goal is gonna be even, let's say, more difficult to achieve. So we need to look for mechanisms. We've run a process to recruit, and it's been very serious to say, okay, we've selected the people that are going to be committed. They need to replicate it. They need to get to 200, and the project's not going to reach out to. So every time more and more, we need to wonder how we can get to more people with the little resources that we have, fewer and fewer resources we have. That's a general challenge that we have to take on. I want to thank you for participating and expressing. I think you talked about the significant issues of localization and the knowledge exchange and all of these processes that sometimes the leaders, different leaderships, they're actually perform the territories where for many humanitarian organizations it's difficult to be there, to go there, to know how to stay there in territories that are more and more controlled by violent actors. And there are several challenges. So I have some questions in mind, but especially to talk about schools and educational institutions as participation and protection scenarios for children, boys and girls. Colombia recently, since 2023, if I'm not mistaken, signed a declaration of safe schools. But sadly enough, hmm, and it happens a lot formally, yeah, it's very clear in paper, but in practice and out there in the field, and this in such diverse Colombia, this turns out to be and continues to be a challenge. My question is, based on the leadership that you have exercised, what has that relationship been like? I mean, with schools and the right to education for boys and girls and adolescents, and especially to strengthen these protection spaces. For example, I'm talking about prevention of recruitment or protection in the case of attacks by all the armed stakeholders that are present in those territories, it may be rural or urban. This has always caused me a lot of, or awakened a lot of interest. And it's in the manifesto. It's not funding and such, because as you said, it would be a job and that's something voluntary. But we've always said this, and again, it's in the manifesto. The organizations, they accompany the grassroots organizations doing projects, or they go directly to a community. That's where the organizations, where they bring projects without so many middlemen, and they reach the community, and they include leaders. The leaders be those who manage the project, right? But something happens, and we said this. It happened that they prepared them, right? We prepare us, but they don't teach us how to make projects. That's a flaw there. So maybe a recommendation, final recommendation, it's to teach means teach how to fish, not to give a fish. Because if you teach me and then I learn and I'm learning, I'm telling you, it's not easy for someone who does not know. It's not easy. And my colleague said this, Daniela? Diana. It's to leave installed capacity. Leave installed capacity is to teach how to make a project, to manage, to do kind of thing. That gives us tools, and let's say it makes things easier for international organizations, for international cooperation to use their resources. So if we get the chance, we can do it, right? And we could live a better quality of life with decent life. And I'm always talking about decency. And I tell my colleagues it's so important, at least me as migrant. I come from a place where I came to another country to look for dignity. And it's been very hard that because of the xenophobia and everything we've lived. But I'm gonna say this quick. Instrumentalization. You know what's happened with instrumentalization? The organizations, we have learned so much that we can reject it. And reject when we see something that's weird, dark, I don't know. It's just a picture and that's it. So we are capable enough to see and to, and right? The, I'm saying no. The organization, and it's going to be terrible, but to us, it releases us of the use and the leaderships. And if we go through it, I'm saying this particularly, me as a community leader, I and that's going to explode, and that's the end of it. Okay? We try not to use because it's true. It's ugly and it doesn't feel good. About education, yeah, yeah. Sorry, sorry. Okay, there were several questions, and we can continue with that in the other room. Thank you all. Naileth, I want to end that by saying that the manifesto, oh, what they've done is it's helped us renew our questions about the identity and the purpose of humanitarian action in Colombia and maybe throughout Latin America. And that's why the manifest is still valid, the manifesto for transformation. That's why it's available to you. That's why many organizations have signed it and they've adopted it. So, okay, I believe that's the contribution to this localization discussion. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, a big round of applause to these panelists, the moderator. They've given us the task. Those of us who have not read the manifesto, we should read it so that we continue to influence and contribute. Thank you very much for the contributions and the enriching panel. We welcome you to leave through that door over there. We've invited to take a look at all the stands of the local partners who are here right outside and in the hall to look at the posters, the stands, and so on. And we will resume in about 10 or 15 minutes. We'll come back here to this main hall. So please walk out that door on my right. They're showing us my right hand door there. Those of us following us online, we're going to take a 1 hour break and we'll resume at 1 in the afternoon in your local time to continue with this second Congress on localization of humanitarian action, Latin America and the Caribbean 2025. See you in an hour. Thank you very much.